Right. This is Julie Boozer, of the president of the Elk Township Historical Society, and as you can see, we are in what is now or what remains here of the one-room schoolhouse at Scandia. And Julie, thanks so much for taking some time with us. Explain a little bit about why it was so important for the Historical Society to maintain and preserve this part of Scandia's history.
Well, Scandia School is one of 12 one-room schools that existed at one time or other in Elk Township. And this one is just one of 12. It was really started in about 1878 or 1875. And originally, this building that we're in right now was down at the coal bed road. And and a few years later, they decided to move it up here as the community was growing, and this is what we call downtown metropolitan Scandia. So they hitched it up with horses and dragged it up the hill and slid it over to where it is today. The school, I think the whole school movement, though, of these country schools, which had 8 grades, is to a great extent a foundation of our democracy. Their high school was not in the picture at that time. These children got their full education, grades 1 to 8. And in this room right now, where we're sitting, is a classroom that probably had 30 students in it, and it was taught by one teacher. Now, this is before certification for teachers. So the teachers were most likely an exemplary student from one of the 12 schools in Elk Township. And they would take a little bit of coursework in the summer after they graduated at one of the teachers' colleges, a term that is how teachers were educated at that time. There were quite a few of them in Pennsylvania because there's so much rural country here. And that student, at probably about, she's a graduate of 8 grades. And that's when she began her career, or he. We had male and female teachers. And for the first year, they probably made like $80. And we know that because we have 95 years of enrollment from this school, and that is phenomenal. I don't know of any other one-room school that has it. They'll have the physical plant, but the enrollment records. And the reason is we had a teacher called Alice Sampson Wall, and she was here for 40 some years teaching and saved everything. So instead of shipping our records off somewhere else to be preserved, we kept them right here, and now we have them. And you can see them right here while you're here. What it does is list the students for each year and the teacher. Some of them list the textbooks or courses that they taught, but it was just, and some of them have the child's name and age. Other times it would just be the grade that they were in when they were here at Scandia School. So we're really lucky to have that, particularly because it's so great for genealogy. People sometimes come and they'll say, I think my grandmother taught here, or another one is, oh, my dad went to school here. And well, we just have to find out what year it was, look them up in the book, and we can assure them that that's what happened. We had a lady came, I think it was last year. She found her dad's name in the enrollment book, and she was so happy. She took a picture of it with her cell phone and sent it to her brothers who live in Kansas. The next open house, the Kansas boys were here to see the record of their dad having gone to school here. So those are just, that is really an important asset that we have. If you want to talk about the school, when we started the preservation in about 2000, 2002. In 2002, these walls were covered with a 4 by 8 foot paneling of Luan paneling. And so when we took down all that Luan paneling, we found these wooden walls painted a light green. And we knew they were original because I was married in the church over here in 1950s, and the same walls are in the church, and it's probably the same people in the community that built it. Because see, there was no Board of Education like we think of today in Scandia. So it was parents were the Board of Education, and they decided the curriculum and who was going to teach here and all the, all the information that you would need to have a school here. Now, the school is right in the middle, as I told you, of downtown metropolitan Scandia, but kids walked here from 4 miles away. There were, of course, no school buses at that time, but they would walk to school as much as, I think the furthest ones we found were probably more like 5 miles. And of course, there would be a lot of farms in between. And in the early days, there was a school at Priest Hollow and a school, the Friendship School, which had roots back to when it was a Quaker meeting house. And then this one, that we're just saying we're right around here. So, I mean, if they were closer to one of those schools, of course, that's where they would go. But when we took down the paneling, we found these original walls. It's Scandia timber and painted light green. And when they took off the paneling from the front of the schoolroom, we found some of the boards were painted black. And so we called it a blackboard. And on that blackboard was in chalk was a date, you can see some arithmetic on there, and some other part of a lesson that the teacher was using. We quickly had worn glass come up and cover it with acrylic so nobody would erase it. And we were so fortunate that the men who put up the paneling didn't erase it before they put up the paneling. So the term blackboard is from boards painted black, and it has become a real icon term in our culture. Even when they had whiteboards in classrooms or green boards, usually the teacher said, go to the blackboard and write the lesson. So, and even today, there's a major platform on the internet called Blackboard, which is for teachers in higher education to use. So we're proud that we have a real blackboard. And you see, in Warren, they would have had a little more money, so they would have real slate, what is be more familiar with kids today seeing in their classrooms. But we were, being a farming community, we didn't have those resources. And remember now, the parents are the Board of Education, and they would contribute whatever they could. But a can of paint was much less expensive than a slate board. So we're so proud to have that. Can you see these desks over here? These desks hold 3 children, and we found them in the attic. So we're very sure that they were desks used in this very room. That middle one will show you what the mice or the squirrels have done to that one. But these will hold like 3 children. You see, when the Scandinavians were entering this area, they just came in the 1880s. They were just coming in hordes, and the schoolroom filled up very quickly. So a way to have more children in a small space is make the desk holding 3 children. So we could be teaching many more kids than using individual desks. And these are just individual school desks. On the three-piece desk though, you see this was a tutor kind of education where the older kids taught the younger kids. We've got one teacher in a classroom full of students. So we very likely would have had like an older girl sitting here with two little first graders next to her and helping them with reading or math or something like that. So a three-person desk was more than just to hold children, but it was very handy for older children to help the younger children. Can you see the front of the classroom? This is how order was maintained in the school, and it's a paddle. And we call it the Board of Education in Scandia School, but the interesting part of it is, of course, it was used here for discipline, but we didn't know anything about it when we were redoing the school. But one of the men who was underneath the school doing something in the space between this building and the ground found this way inside of that space. And what we think is, probably some disgruntled boy who wanted to be sure it wasn't there tomorrow. He got a hold of it and threw it under the school as far as he could. So it's kind of an interesting piece.
But the conventional wisdom in Warren County by the latter part of the 20th century is that if a substitute teacher was going to cover for a school, this was the school to cover, because the children in Scandia, at least by the end of the 20th century, were reputed to be very well behaved. And it was a comparatively easy substitution job to come to the school.
Let's see. Oh, the long bench. Can you just point to that with the long bench in the front? Yeah. Okay, that's a recitation bench. And the teacher would call maybe the third grade to come up and recite their lessons to her. Now, when that's going on, all the other kids are listening. So we've had people who wrote stories about going to school here. In this sort of a situation, they learned a lot. But if you were a third grade student and you had a little time, they could listen to the fourth grade students reciting a lesson. So that was a great help to the teacher, of course, that there was a way that kids could learn from each other. And as I say, that's a recitation bench. The desk behind it is an original Elk Township teacher's desk. We have two of them, one's out in the hall where you sign in when you come, and then this one here. You notice that there's no electricity in this building. So this is a very sunny day, and this is as much light as they would ever have. Now, Scandia, like every other community, has cloudy days when you can't see very well. And these children did all of their schoolwork, even on a cloudy day, in a fairly dimly lighted room. And with no electricity, the only heat was from a stove like this one that we have right here. And there was a stove in this room, and it went right up through the ceiling into there was a brick chimney that took the smoke out. The other interesting thing is, Wes, can you go over pages?
This here?
This is start at the beginning. At the other way, yeah. This is the flip chart that Debbie Fitzsimmons and Laura Brainerd made that is about all of the 12 schools in Elk Township. We don't have much from some of them, but we have a little bit on each of the 12 schools. Now, when we have 12 schools, let's just keep in mind, this is a lumbering area of the country. And families would go in and cut the timber in a certain area, and once it was cut, then the school closed because the families moved on to the next timber area. So some of these schools were only in existence a few years, maybe 10 years, like the Hodge Run School, which was down in the river. And it was named for the Hodge family. And there were 3 or 4 families that moved in, so the father could work on cutting timber, and the children, his children, then could go to school at a one-room school that was built right there. As we come up to the Scandia School in that display, we have a lot of classroom pictures and with names of the kids. Most of them we've pretty well figured out who the kids were. Some of them, a couple of them we've got quite a lot of holes. We don't know who the kids were. So, to be able to come here, you could probably see not only the name of your ancestor, but also we know, once we find the ancestor in the enrollment book, then we can go over to this chart and find the year that they went to school here and find their picture in the enrollment chart. And that's one of the highlights of open houses, when people come and they not only see their dad in the enrollment book, but when he was in the 4th grade or 5th grade. So we're very fortunate to have that. And that's because we've had teachers that stayed here a long, long time, and they saved everything. Can you get this little table over here? That's the water fountain. Is the crockery vessel that is a water fountain where the kids would get a drink of water. And Wes, can you pick up those cups? Every student had his own cup, and they were actually hanging on the wall. There were hooks on the wall, and so each child had their own cup, and they could get water out of a vessel such as that. In the very beginning, they didn't have that. They had a water pail with a dipper, and so it was more sanitary to have this water dispenser. But that's fairly late. It's, that wasn't in the beginning. And the metal pails that you see there are lunch pails. That was the lunch pail in the very early years. And of course, they brought their lunch to school with them because there was no cafeteria or anything like that. And they would just have lunch at their desk, and then they would go out and play on the playground. And winter and summer, they quite often might have had a play period in the morning and a play period, of course, at lunch, and maybe one in the afternoon. But when they came back in to enter the classroom, they had to, of course, take off their outside clothes, but go over there and wash their hands. So at that time, there was a pail sitting there and a wash basin. Same rule for the bathroom. The outhouse was out behind the school, quite a ways, and if they needed to use those facilities, in the wintertime, they'd have to get dressed in their snowsuit and use the facilities. But when they came back in, it was mandatory to wash your hands at the basin before you went back to your desk. The school, the clock on the wall is from a school. Actually, not this one, but one of the other schools. And so they had a clock in the room. And there's a reed organ behind me in the corner. That was given to us. It's period to the late 1800s. Whether it was in this school or not, we don't know. It could have been. But that's quite a luxury. Really, only the upscale families had a reed organ in their parlor. But it could have been here. We don't have any record of it, so I can't really verify that with you.
So if somebody wanted to come up and see all this all these amazing things firsthand. You guys are here the second Saturday.
Second Saturdays of all the summer months. Now, these rooms are not heated, and we have not put electricity in the classroom simply because they never would have had it. And I think it helps you to realize the conditions under which these children worked at their desks. They did not have paper. Paper would be too expensive, so they used lap slates. They would be using a lap slate with chalk. See, paper is too expensive. And at that time, the term that we use, store-bought, didn't exist. So, the lessons, they would do their lessons on a chalk board, and this is real slate here, but they would have a lap slate and chalk, no paper. And the teacher may have had a few pieces of paper for records, like enrollment records, something like that, but the students were completely dependent on a lap slate. You want to hear about when the school closed?
Yeah, sure.
Well, this school opened in the 1870s, and it functioned for over 100 years. Say until I think, Robbie, you would say this particular building and school is from 130 years old. Now, when you, as families were moving around and the enrollment was decreasing, and it was very expensive for the Warren School District, which this now was part of, to maintain a school here with, at that time, about 20 students. Per capita, per child, it would be very expensive to have teachers and children. And by that time, they had 2 teachers here. So the Warren School District wanted to close this school, for about, certainly through the 70s and 80s. They kept threatening to do it. The parents were very much wanted to keep the school here because they were concerned about their, first graders riding all the way to Russell in the wintertime on snowy roads, and they wanted the school to stay right here around their homes. So the parents fought it, and the parents were able to keep it here until 1999, when the school district just felt it was too expensive. So they offered it to the supervisors for $1. And the supervisors looked at these buildings and thought, how could they ever afford to maintain them? And did they really have a use for them? So they refused the buildings. So some of people around here, we thought, well, let's take a survey of the community and see how many people want it. So we went door to door, and we found that about, well over 90% of the people we talked to said, oh, they wanted to save the school. And they were very positive about it. The people that voted against it were just concerned about taxes being raised. And these buildings are very expensive to maintain because, we're talking about 1870 buildings sitting on the very top of the mountain in all the weather that they could possibly get here in Pennsylvania. So we brought those statistics to the supervisors and showed them, how many people really wanted to do it. And they then had another meeting, and they came with their opinion was that, okay, they would take the school if we could form an organization that would maintain it, like a historical society. At that time, we were called the Committee to Save Scandia School. And so the supervisors agreed, and we talked them into giving us a 99-year lease. The reason for that was when you go to foundations for money, they want to know if you're going to be there for a while. And So with that 99-year lease in hand, we just wrote proposals to foundations in Warren. And there's probably 6 of them. And each year we would write a proposal for something that we needed, like a roof or a major part. So in the first 10 years, we got all our money from Warren Foundations, and then of course memberships. It's $15 a year, and we would be delighted to have anyone become a member. But $15 memberships don't buy a whole lot of materials. So we did get generous grants from foundations in Warren. Now today, we're in Warren Gives, and that's been very successful for us. And it's a whole lot easier for the people who write the proposals, because you only have to write one. So it's really been excellent for us as a small organization who's just needing funds. And it is fairly expensive to keep these buildings going, but we've done it 100% on local talent, local members. And there we've done all the outside work, built the playground with state money help on that, but everything that you see maintained has been done by local people who were interested in saving the school and bringing it back to where it was, like removing all this paneling. There were false ceilings in here, there were false ceilings in the other room too. All that had to be removed to just get it back to where it was. And that was all done volunteer labor. And it's an example, I think, of what a community can do for themselves without having the government there to do it for them. And I think Scandia is known for volunteerism, and we think it's the air that we breathe and the water that we drink up here that helps to make really faithful volunteers. The outside, we just a group of people, whoever could come, we'd have a painting day or 2 days to paint the outside, and cook hot dogs at night or something like that, and just have kind of a fun day. And the guys that probably do the high parts, and the rest of us would do what we could reach. So I think maybe that's one of our outstanding characteristics of volunteerism, and it's been going all the way through. We did have, when we put the new roofs on this time, the metal roofs, we did have that. I mean, the contract included installing them. We're not really good at putting on metal roofs. Now, that roof was quite a controversy because, you see, it had always been handmade wood shingles. And that was going a little far for our volunteers. But wooden shingles don't last very long, really. So when we had replaced them the first time, we did put, just regular asphalt shingles that looked like wood shingles. And our volunteers did all of that, of course. But when we got to the metal roof that we just put on, which never was on this school, but it's period. They certainly had tin roofs all over here, but it wasn't one in the school. Probably it was too expensive in the old days to do that. So when we had the tin roof put on, just simply that it would last longer, that was done without volunteer help. That was quite an adjustment for us in Scandia, not to be doing it ourselves.
All right.
What else would you like to know?
Well, I think I don't want to give away all the secrets. We got to get people to want to come up here. So, Julie, thank you so much for your time, and Wes, you as well. And again, can't recommend coming up to the Elk Township Historical Society, the one-room schoolhouse and museum. Again, Julie, thank you so much.